Healthy soil is where the topsoil, which is that brown portion, this is typical on healthy soil. You have a top green, a little root zone, and down below it, we'll get into some more details on what this looks like, but the roots won't go in here because there's nothing for the roots to go for. So when you open up the soil, the roots can go down and get better nutrients, but more importantly, you get deep roots, you have a water reservoir. In arid regions, that's really important because when rain comes occasionally, you want to build a little lake in the soil. When you do that, you don't have to irrigate as often, or if a drought comes, it can withstand it because it has a reservoir, deep roots, open soil. But you got to get it from here to there. And you cannot do it synthetically. You must do it biologically. And we're going to explain how that works. We're going to pick out a few families of materials. Man has classified the biology of the soil. There are actually 5 families they've classified them: bacteria, actinomycetes, fungi, algae, and protozoa. But I'm just going to pick out a few of these biologies that we found in good, healthy soil that needs to be there. And we're going to go over each one of these to tell you what they do. The azotobacter has the ability to fix atmospheric nitrogen. If I can increase that population, I can reduce the nitrogen. But what's going on now, the synthetic nitrogen has to be attached to an element, usually a salt. When you get into salt, it affects this little fellow, azotobacter. And so when he dies out, so does the nitrogen ability to produce nitrogen in the soil. So we look for that little boy to be there, and we try to feed him because he's bringing us nitrogen free out of the air. Actinomycetes is another, he's in the fungus area, actually his own classification. This is the formation of humus and makes minerals soluble. Humus is the essence of the soil where all the plants get their nutrients. And if we can build him up, we're going to have these minerals soluble, and then the plants can pull it out of the soil, again, reducing the synthetic needs of fertilizers. Pseudomonas is a very interesting little fellow. He controls diseases and fungus. And the other thing we found out, he can actually take out all the hydrocarbons. Now, hydrocarbons is interesting because a lot of our pesticides use hydrocarbons as attachment to the elements, so we can break them down. Rhizobium is the surrounding of the root, where it transforms, or the root pulls in the nutrients through the roots. And so we want that fellow around that roots to be dense and heavy, because that's what's pulling the nutrients into the plant. Bacillus, this is another one that's really effective. There's companies that just focus on that guy alone. They build a whole industry by selling a product called bacillus. And that is because there's a lot of pathogenic funguses. And how did the pathogenic fungus get there? Because the soil wasn't prepared properly, or the life of the soil was reduced because synthetic in, and we lose him, and so we have to put him back. And there's some products out there that does that. Cyanobacteria, this is a real interesting one. Cyanobacteria is an algae. It's an algae that is classified as a blue-green, but he's not really a blue-green. It's an algae acting like a bacteria. It has chlorophyll, so it has to have sunlight. And so when you see a green cast on the soil, not moss, but green cast of this cyanobacteria, you know what's going on? It is fixing all kinds of nitrogen. That's what you want. You have to build him if you want to get. So we got to see all these nitrogen builders, all the nutrients. That's what we're working on. That's what we call healthy soil. You going down into real fertile valley of good soil, you'll find all these boys in here. And then fungi is mostly for decomposing plant materials that's left over, crop residues, and those kind of things in the soil that has to be broken down. So how's our material works? Here's what the population in a teaspoon of soil. 600 million, 1 to 600 million individual bacteria. and we're going to talk about that. Bacteria is the key to what we do in our products. We feed that guy. This bacteria, if you do not have that, that is the food sources for all the higher life forms in the soil. Without bacteria, nothing else can grow in the soil. The life of the soil is depending on the bacteria. That thing goes fast, but it can be destroyed just as quick. Just like bacteria, we had to take on our hands, soaps, and all those cleaning agents. Well, they've got, every time you spray something on the soil to kill an insect, when you kill an insect, you're going to kill him too. And that's the problem. And so, how do you get around that? Well, we either got to break down those toxins really fast so we don't kill these guys who are the feed for the rest of the material. In fact, bacteria actually is the food stock for the protozoa. And we're going to talk about the protozoa because that is one of the things you want to look for in soil, because he produces a whole bunch of nitrogen. In fact, if you get a high enough protozoa count, you can get up to 400 pounds of nitrogen per acre just with a high concentration. And 400 pounds of nitrogen, no one puts that much nitrogen in crops unless, there's a few crops that requires it, but you have all the nitrogen you possibly need. But you can't do it instantly. That's the difficult. And so what we do is how to get a hold of these and feed those boys. When we feed those boys, and that's the CBX concept that we're working on. But how do I get this going and started in the growth of this biology? What is the limiting factor? Is it some nutrient? Well, it turns out the industry doesn't understand there's one element that's missing in our soils. Take a look at this soil photos. Which of the soils looks healthiest? What is the difference in the color that makes it healthy? Everybody's going to pick that side because that's what you're used to. Rich, dark soil, healthy. What is it? Well, it turns out this is more like desert soils and this is more like rich, fertile ground. So the farmers, they figure out, they spray all their stuff, but they do not understand that carbon is our limiting factor. In fact, Sweden in their university found that the bacterial growth in most of the 28 soils that they investigated, it was the limiting factor of carbon. And when was the last time you put carbon on your soil? Farmers do not spray carbon. They spray N, P, K, and other, actually 16 nutrients. Most of them focus on the nitrogen because they know that's a method of growing fast. Everything, because nitrogen is the proteins for cell growth in plants, animals, and biology. But carbon is the energy source. We are a carbon system. Without carbon, you cannot live. So you must have carbon. We get carbon from plants in the form of sugars. So does the biology, so that everything on this planet that lives must have carbon, and especially in our soils. And so carbon is the energy of life, and we all have experience with these forms of carbon. But isn't it interesting that we're now focusing on CO2, and we're going to go into why CO2 is going to be important to the whole system. But let's go talk about the soil profile first. In our soil profile, there are several segments, and you can read them, but basically, this is the area you want to focus on because that's where all things happen. This is where all the biology is. This is where all the roots are. They're taking up the nutrients. And so the deeper this is, the more fertile your ground and the higher productive rate you can get. So how do I build this top layer of soil? And it's made up of biology, organic materials, insects, all kinds of things in here. Down here you can just read the rest of it about the difference where the root can go, but there's really no nutrients because nutrients require releasing from biology. And typically biology, there's some live down here, but not in higher concentrations that is up here. So how do we get organic or carbon in our soils? There are three typically methods that have been used in the past. Recycling crops, let's plow back your leftover of the crop. It takes decades to get there because you have roots and what's left of the stubble of the crops, or if, for instance, grass, you got thatch and all the things they can recycle back. But a lot of, in the grass industry, you're mowing off the growth and taking it away. You're not recycling it. So there's really little recycling in the grass industry, but in crops for agriculture, typically it's plow back the organic matter. Now there's a system coming out that's called no-till. Because the reason why they're doing no-till, or turning the soil over, because every time you turn the soil over, you're aerating it, but you're breaking up all the biological colonies. And when you break up the biological colonies, they got to start over again. And so it's constantly a difficult time to get a hold. So recycling crops for centuries, that's how they've done it. The new factors are coming out that we had to get carbon by composting. So there are big composting operations that trying to build carbon from other sources, from leaves or trash, wherever they can, compost it, and the biology breaks it down, and you're getting basic carbon from it. But that takes years in compost, and we'll show you why. And the third one we declare only takes months. And that's what we say the future is. Because of what we're thinking, if I can create the biology, I can create the carbon. And here's why. Let's see, I got one more to get to that, how to build carbon. If you took 6 inches of soil, which is, I don't know how many centimeters that is, but it's 6 inches of soil is about 2,000 pounds of material. So we can calculate, that's usually what is the topsoil, is about 6 inches. So for every 1% organic matter in the soil, desert soils run between 1 and 3% organic matter. Good rich soil, I presume here in Norway and in Europe, you're running 3 to 6% organic matter. And especially in the lowlands and the valleys, they're running high concentrated organic matter. That's where your topsoil is until it gets destroyed. So it's 2,000 pounds to get 1%. So crop recycle, 3 to 5 tons per acre. Let's suppose that we have that much organic matter. And 20% of it is organic because the rest is, you took off the crop. So that leaves you 2,000 pounds of organic matter per acre on the soil. Well, to get increase 1%, it will take me 10 years to get there, just to 1%. And if I'm destroying more than 1% because of my agricultural practices, I'm never going to get there. And if I use salt-based fertilizers or chemicals or whatever I'm doing on my soil, I'm going backwards, even though I'm recycling the crop. Trying to get ahead, they're going to put some additional, that's where the barnyard manures, the composting operations, try to bring in compost. But typically, a composting operation is a 20 to 40% organic matter. Rest of the moisture and everything else in there. So for every 2,000 pounds that you put on per acre of compost, there will only be 400 pounds of actual organic matter in that compost. To increase 1% organic matter in the soil will take you 50 tons per acre of compost. And compost is not cheap. It is awful expensive to do this. This is cheap, but it's very slow. This can get there, very expensive.